All right, I just got the thumbs up, so that means we can get started. So week 3, this is our last class session together. So at the end of our class today, I have some time built in for questions about anything Calvin football, anything, if there was something interesting I said, anything that you guys want to talk through there. I will apologize. I have a horrible cough, and I don't know why, but it won't go away. So if I start coughing, I'll just have to stop and take a drink. But I'm excited for today. I'm going to recap a couple things we talked about over the last 2 weeks, and then get into kind of some big picture college football impact on college campuses. And I think this could potentially open up a whole bunch of questions. Some I'll know the answers to, some that I won't know the answers to. But we'll just jump right in, and then like I said at the end, I'll leave some room for some questions about anything that we've talked about over the last 2 weeks, and then things that you hear me say today as well. So I think it's important because we've talked about like transfer portal, name, image, and likeness. Today we're going to talk about financial impact across campuses, what college football does and doesn't do. But I think it's always important to come back to what is our mission. You can get caught up in so many different things. What is our mission? What are we really here to do? Like keep the main thing the main thing. And so it's really important to me that we revisit with this with our staff all the time. We talk about all the time, we will develop and mentor young men to be champions for life. And I take that really, really seriously here at Calvin. I would say that the majority of coaches get into coaching, whatever sport it is, because they've probably had a good coach in their life and they want to give back, right? They want to do what that coach did for them. And I would say that's what initially got me into coaching, and I think I probably strayed away from that a little bit. But this is what our program is deeply, deeply rooted in here, developing and mentoring young men to be champions for life. And Dan and I were just having a conversation. Anytime your job is based on the decision-making process and skills of 18 to 22-year-olds, it's a little bit crazy, from day to day, because these young individuals at this age can make some crazy decisions at times. But this is really important to me that we do this well at Calvin, on the field, in the classroom, in the community, champions of our faith. So I just want to hit that. We'll talk about that again at the end as well. But it's just important to always start with that so we know exactly where we're headed. And then we talked about this at length in our first session, just kind of what our Calvin football DNA looks like there. All right, so first class we talked about just Calvin football. What is Calvin football? What does that look like on this campus? Last week we talked about big picture football on a national scale. So the two main topics we talked about last week was the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness, and the impact that has today on college football. And then today, we're going to talk about how football impacts the entire campus, and really we're going to talk about that financially today. What does an athletic department from the Division I level all the way to the Division III level look like financially? So I'm going to give some big picture examples that come from the Department of Education. I did not make up these numbers that I'm going to share with you today, but that's where we're going to head with this topic today. So a little bit of recap from last week. We're going to talk about that. Just the college football profile, transfer portal, name, image, and likeness. There was a couple people that emailed me questions. I want to make sure I address those questions today whenever we're in here, and then we'll move on to this. And then I just want to finish with talking about what's the future of Calvin football? What does this look like today? Where is this thing headed right here on our very campus? So we talked about this last week, just the different breakdowns of divisions, right? So basically 2 different divisions of Division I football. We have FBS and we have FCS football. That makes up NCAA Division I. Then we have NCAA Division II football. We have NCAA Division III football, which that's where Calvin lives. And then the NAIA is the last division there, which is different from the NCAA. So we talked about that last week. And we also talked about this and just kind of what this looks like, how many different programs there are at each level. And today I think you'll see why there are more Division III programs than there are any other level of programs, just because of the financial model that's in place there. And then from a scholarship standpoint, what that looks like as a cost to the university, and then from a roster size standpoint as well. So that was just kind of a quick summary on just really the profile of that. So NCAA transfer portal, we talked about this last week. And really what we talked about, the transfer portal it's just an online database. I think that some people think it's like this mystical creature. It's really not. It's an online database that you just log into and you can see every kid who is intending to go to a different institution. My personal opinion, not anybody else's, is that the transfer portal is more bad than it is good. But that's just my personal opinion on that. Okay, and then we also talked about name, image, and likeness. So, 2 questions that I received this week outside of class that I just want to recap on name, image, and likeness. So, do any Calvin athletes receive NIL money? The answer to that is yes. So there are athletes on our campus that do receive. I don't know the amounts. A lot of them are fairly small amounts compared to the rest of the world of name, image, and likeness money, but that is a thing on our campus. So Calvin is involved in the transfer portal. We do have athletes that have got in the portal. We've taken athletes out of the portal, and we do have athletes on our campus that do receive name, image, and likeness money. And then the next question was, do NIL deals have to come in the form of money? I think this is a really good question. I should have answered this more clearly last week. So the answer to that is no. Name, image, and likeness can come in a whole bunch of different ways. So athletes can sign a deal with a clothing brand, right? And they can receive free clothes. They can sign a deal with a car dealership. That's a really popular thing at the Division I level, is car dealerships will work with universities. And so as an example, the University of Utah, all of their offensive linemen get a brand new truck whenever they come on campus. That's their name, image, and likeness deal on campus there. Some car dealerships might do that for an entire team. Some smaller schools may work a deal with a restaurant to where the entire team can go get a free burger and fries once a week or whatever that is. So those can all be name, image, and likeness deals. Before there was legislation around this, that was all not legal, right? You couldn't give people cars. You couldn't give them food because they were an athlete. You couldn't give them free clothes. But now with the name, image, and likeness rules, now you actually can do that. So there's a lot of moving parts with that. It's a very interesting process because at the end of the day, the coaching staff is supposed to be completely removed from that. Name, image, and likeness is based off of the individual, so they can go get their own individual deals. So there can be players on your team that can go seek their own name, image, and likeness deals that they can get for themselves. So those were just a couple of things that we talked about last week. Before we move on from that, were there any other questions about transfer portal or name, image, and likeness that you guys want to talk through? Yes. Yep, so question was, can your athletes get agents? The answer to that is yes. It cannot be through, we can't advise them on specific agents, and it can't be done through us, but a lot, and that's a really good question, especially your higher end athletes, your Division I athletes, a lot of them do have agents. I was reading something 2 days ago about a person who's getting in the transfer portal, and it was talking about, his agent is advising him to do this. His agent is advising him to do that. So I think, my personal opinion, again, not anybody else's, I think that can get really hairy because now there's agent fees involved with that. And so when you get a really good athlete, whatever sport it is, their agent may encourage them to get in the transfer portal to get more money because at the end of the day, then the agent's getting more money as well. So yes, 100%, that did not used to be a thing. Now, lots of Division I athletes do have agents. Good question.
Can the coaches do anything on any division level for the kids, like even taking them out for a meal, or is that taboo on all levels?
That's a very good question. So yes, you can do that. You just report that through the NCAA. We've always been able to take a kid for a meal. Now, providing groceries for the entire week and doing it week after week after week, you cannot do that. But yes, you can do that. Yep. Good question. Anything else? I know there's a ton of information with the transfer portal and with name, image, and likeness. Again, if there's other questions, we can talk about them at the end. What I want to do is I've gathered some information today from the Department of Education, so it's officially been reported. So these aren't numbers that I've just made up. And what I want to do is I just want to talk through financial implications of college football and then big picture college athletic departments. So what does this really look like? Because I think there's a lot of good information out there. I think there's a lot of bad information out there on, man, what does it mean to have a football team on your campus? Obviously at Calvin, we existed for 148 years without football, and then football came. And there's a lot of pictures of, wow, are we just spending a whole bunch of money on this deal? What's actually happening here? So I want to show you, I'm going to give you 2 Division I examples, and then I'm going to show you 4 charts from Division III on just kind of what financial breakdowns look like. There's a lot of information on some of these charts, so I'll do my best to explain it. but feel free to just raise your hand if you have a question, and we can talk through that stuff. So I have two FBS schools. I'm not going to tell you what school they are, but they're both from the Big Ten, right? They're both from the Big Ten, and this is just examples of what their athletic department budgets and expenditures look like, and then what football brings in and what football takes out. So I'm going to take you through two of these examples to start with. Again, both of these are from the Big Ten. I chose the Big Ten just because that conference is from around here. All right. All right, June 2024, this was at one specific school. The athletic department budget was submitted. All right, so this is example number one that I'm going to give you from FBS. So remember, when we're talking about FBS, that's the highest level of college football. 85 scholarships, roughly 120 athletes on the team. This is the whole athletic department from this specific institution submitted their budget, right? So in 2024, their report, they submitted a budget of $230.4 million as their operating expense. That's for the whole athletic department, right? So that's every sport included. Roughly $230 million as their operating expenses. $230.6 million in revenue, right? So this particular institution that I'm doing this example on is towards the top in the Big Ten. If they were to say who has the healthiest budget status, this is what that would look like, all right? So again, they were projected to bring in $230 million in revenues in 2024 as well, okay? So about $200,000 positive is what they said. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, that's what was going to be positive from that standpoint. So the fiscal year projection for the following year, for 24-25, you can see that their operating expenses went up drastically, to $253 million. They were projected to bring in $255 million in 2025, which is happening right now, which would be $2.1 million in positive. So where the increase came in the Big Ten, there's a new TV contract, right? And so a lot of money, I'm going to show you here in a second, where does the money come from? A lot of it, so it's ticket sales and TV is where the majority of the money comes from that standpoint. So that's the entire athletic department, right? Just from a numbers standpoint, what was on the books there. So now I'm going to show you from that same athletic department, here's where the money comes from a football standpoint. All right, so where is that money when we talk about, money coming in, where is that money coming in from? So TV contracts is the biggest. 50 to 70 million is what they had because the Big Ten hadn't worked out their final deal yet. 50 to 70 million dollars was coming to that university from TV contracts. Next is ticket sales, right? So at this specific university, about $14.8 million per game is what they were bringing in from their ticket sales. So ticket revenue, again, that's just from football from that standpoint, all right? So they were bringing in $50.3 million that particular year. Conference contributions, right? $45 million. Endowments, nearly $10 million. FBS revenue, what does FBS revenue mean? So every team that's in the FBS, every team that's eligible for the playoffs gets a share of what they call FBS money. So every team is going to get roughly this amount of money from that standpoint, from the FBS, all right? So that totals $172 million in football revenue at that particular institution. So again, I don't want any of you to take this. I'm not here advocating, hey, you have to have football to do this. I'm just showing these are the numbers that are on paper of what football has historically brought in to different departments, all right? So total cost of operating football, about $50 million at this particular school, right? So in that year, they were going to bring in 172, and it was going to cost about $50 million to operate. So when we talk about operating, what does that mean? So this particular institution has right at 50 members on the entire football staff. So from coaches to administrators to whatever that looks like, about 50 people. So salaries takes up a decent chunk of that. And then when you talk about team travel, you talk about feeding a team, you talk about scholarships, all that goes into play when you talk about this $50 million to operate that. and then they brought in 172. So where does that other, $122 million go when you take a step back to here, right? It takes a certain amount of money to operate the entire athletic department. So some sports are generating revenue. There's several sports that are not generating revenue, but we need to have all sports within the athletic department. So it's important that, an institution like this one can leverage football and what they're doing there. All right? So that's just one example. Before I move on, any questions about that? I know that's a lot of numbers to digest. I saw your eyes get really big when you saw 230 million at first. Yes.
Just out of interest, how does the football revenue compare to basketball revenue?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I didn't look at basketball specifically because I was just looking at this for this class. But if football in this one brought in 172, and there's $60 million left, it's somewhere in that range. Typically, basketball does generate positive revenue for institutions. I don't know the number on this specific one right here. Good question. Okay, so let's get to this next example. This next one I think might potentially blow your mind. That's what I'm here to do today. All right, so same thing. This is going to be example number 2 from the exact same conference. So we're talking about the Big Ten, right? We're talking about the Big Ten here, which most people would say one of the more popular, probably one of the more healthy conferences in the country, right? So this example is from a team. The first one we looked at, you could argue either way, probably the healthiest financial team athletically in the Big Ten. This next one that we're going to look at ranked between 5 and 8 in the Big Ten, all right? So this is example number 2 from the entire athletic department, all right? So remember, the first one we looked at was $230 million. This next one, $178 to operate, okay? $178.2 to operate. This was their 2024 projected budget, okay? So now they're projecting $136 million in revenues and a $70 million. My math is wrong there. 70 is correct. This number is incorrect here, right? It was supposed to be 108. A $70 million deficit, right? So when you look at that, it's like, wow, that's very, very interesting to see what that is. There are a lot of athletic programs, a lot of athletic departments at the Division I level that are operating off of a deficit. This is where a lot of donor money has to come in to make up the difference there. But what you'll see here, which is going to be very interesting, okay, so let me go back to this slide here. $70 million deficit, and this isn't the worst team in the league, right? There's some teams that are operating on over $100 million deficit per year from the athletic department. So from this standpoint, TV contracts, $59 million, ticket sales, this is where it's very different, right? Very, very different from the previous example. The previous example we showed $50.3 million in ticket sales, whereas this particular football team is bringing in 14.7 for the year. The first example we showed, we're bringing in 14.8 per game. This team is bringing in $14.7 million per year from a ticket sales standpoint. All right? Conference contributions, $45 million, same as the other one. Endowments, around $6 million is what they're bringing in there. FBS revenue, 7.3, same as the other one. Okay, so this one, the last one, right, was just a little bit higher than this, about 40 million higher. And here, 42 million to operate, 132 million is what they were bringing in. So, long story short, football was still very much positive, in the positive from this standpoint, but overall, as an athletic department, not nearly as positive from a amount of revenue that they were going to generate from that standpoint. So as I was going through those numbers, I just thought that was very interesting. And I'll be honest with you, I've dug into this a little bit before this class. I did not know that people were running that big of a deficit, department-wide from that standpoint. I thought that was very interesting. When you look at the Big Ten and you look at different conferences, you see, and we think it's just positive all the time, and that's not necessarily the case. Now, people ask all the time, wow, okay, so why does Calvin have football now? Why didn't they have football in the past? And what you'll see across the country, generally speaking, is this is a revenue-generating sport at every single level. So what I want to dig into now, really kind of the bulk of our time today, is I want to dig into what does this look like from a Division III standpoint? Because you're not talking about $14 million in ticket sales. You're not talking about $45 million in conference contributions or really any of this from that standpoint. So what does this look like? Okay, and I said it earlier, Division III has 0 athletic scholarships, right? So essentially every person on our team, every person in Division III, they're paying their way to go to school, right? Whatever's left from their financial aid package, they are paying that money to go to school. So there's some pretty cool graphics here of what this looks like, and I'm going to do my best to explain them. Again, feel free to stop me and ask questions as you have them. So the title of this one, and this is from the Department of Education. You can see down there. So Division III football pays off is what I put on the top of this one. So I'm just going to read this piece to you, and then I'm going to talk through this graph with you. All right, so 238 of the 239 Division III football teams filing their fiscal year 23 financial disclosures registered significant financial gains averaging $1.8 million in net revenue collected from their football student athletes above and beyond the cost of running the team and the athletic department, making football a key source of reliable revenue and a successful enrollment management tool. So this is the time that football was added at Calvin. And so if you follow higher education, and especially small school higher education, people talk about over the next few years kind of this cliff that they talk about, numbers of students going to college. What does this look like? What are ways that we can really enhance our institution? And so there's a lot of reasons that Calvin added football, right? One of them is right here, right? I think it's a great student experience, great student athlete experience. A lot of people really wanted it at Calvin, but when you look at the numbers, it makes a lot of sense. So as we look at this first diagram here, over here on the left, really it's talking about, well, we'll start down here. So in red, that's a football program expense, right? So there's 238 institutions down here at the bottom, right? And you can see all of them did cost something to operate, right? It does cost to operate. You have to travel to games. You have to pay for officials. You have to pay for helmets, shoulder pads. It does cost to operate a football program, right? And then what you'll see here, so in black, shared additional athletic department overhead, and then in green is estimated additional net revenue paid to school by football players. And so what you will see here for every single one of these, there's one right here. There's one school in here that stops at the black and doesn't have any green. Every other institution on here has green, which is additional net revenue paid to the school by football players. So one program broke completely even. The institution didn't make any money off of it. The average was $1.8 million. So over here, it's obviously 0. It goes up to $5.5 million. So we're not talking about $230 million. We're not talking about those types of numbers at Division III. But what we are talking about here is fairly significant financial gain from this, right? And why do we see that? One, the roster sizes are pretty big. And so in our conference, the MIAA alone, you have teams that range anywhere from 95 to up to 200 student athletes on their roster. You have to find kind of that happy medium of, what does that number look like? What is the best number to carry on your roster? But what you'll notice here are there are teams that were bringing in significant money to their particular institution because the green number is that's what the students are paying to go to school after the football program expense, which is in red there. Does that make sense? Any questions over that graph? I thought that was very interesting as I dug into that, just to see, hey, this is the national average, right? The average football program is bringing in the institution $1.8 million from the student athletes. Any questions on that? Yes.
What's the average number of players on the roster?
So that ranges all over the place. I would have to look that up. I don't know exactly. I just know our conference. And so as I look at our conference, we have 3 teams in our league that are over 150. Everybody else is anywhere from 92, 93 to that 120 range that's where most of the rosters live from that standpoint. Yes.
With regard to that green part, the good part of that green also
Absolutely.
And so, the higher the red is, the less of money is available for the academic program.
For sure.
Is the academic program losing out because of football?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I would argue loudly no. I mean, are there situations where that could happen? Absolutely, that could happen, yes.
Coach, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the overall question was, is the academic department losing out because the red in some of these is bigger than it is in others, what it takes to operate football? I think you could largely argue here that the green lines, generally speaking, are much larger than the red lines. So overall, I would say no. In some situations, yes, you could argue that. Overall, I would say no on that. Good question. What other questions on that piece? Again, I have some more data to show you. I just wanted to start with that one, just as an overall picture from that standpoint. Yes.
That have the large expense line there?
Can I identify them as in, like, say which ones they are?
Right.
No, so it doesn't say the names on here, right? It doesn't say the names of the school, and I don't know those. My guess would be that the larger ones are the teams that travel further, because one of the bigger expenses in Division III football is team travel. Do you have to get on a plane to go somewhere? Can you bus? So at Calvin, we bus everywhere, and generally speaking, we bus the day of the game. So our travel expenses are very low. For some teams, if their conference is way more spread out, where they may have to go stay in a hotel every Friday night, then their expenses would be higher.
Coach, do you know the expenses within your conference, generally speaking?
The easy answer to that is no. No. So I don't know what other teams in our league spend. I have a general idea, but I don't know their specifics. This is just big picture Division III. All right, I'm going to move to this next one here. So this talks about, so you may or may not have heard of the demographic cliff, right? So what this diagram here talks about is most Division III schools are in a tough position. Most Division III schools are smaller enrollment, right? With COVID, numbers went down at schools institutionally. And then there's a demographic cliff coming that says, hey, there's not as many students over the next few years that are going to be going to school, and are they going to go to small private Christian schools? And so the numbers would say no to that. But here's what it says on here. With the coming demographic cliff, most Division III football schools may be in a very difficult position, with high admit rates and low yield rates, leaving them very exposed to the impacts of fewer applicants and making draws like football participation even more important as they fight to keep their dorms full and finances strong. So that's in the red over here. And then over here in the green, it says there's a minority of Division III football schools, however, who are lucky to be well positioned to get through the demographic cliff with minimal impact. All right, so if you look at this graph, this is the yield rate, and this is the size of the class that's coming in. This was, again, from financial year 23, right, from financial year 23. So you can see a lot of schools over here in the red, and what that means from that standpoint is fewer numbers are choosing to attend, right, and they're admitting a whole bunch of students. Every person that's applying, they're getting into school. Whereas you just have this small little curve over here of schools where it's like, yep, there's a big demand from ample applicants, so they can be super selective on who they admit into school. And then they're getting, up in here, they're getting a lot of those kids, right? Their classes are staying about the same size. So all this graph really shows is that over the next couple years, you've seen teams add football for a lot of different reasons. And one big reason why is because it's a draw to school, right? It's a draw into school. So what we've experienced here at Calvin is we have been able to get into high schools from a football recruiting standpoint and bring students that typically were not coming to Calvin, right? There's been a lot of students that we've been into really from different parts of the country that have been able to come here with the initial interest of football. That's not the only reason they're coming. They obviously love the academic piece, but the initial interest and draw was football there, and it allowed us really over the last 2 years for our enrollment to continue to increase, which is a good thing. So this graph just shows that piece right there. Any questions on that? Is Calvin closer to the green than the red? Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would depend. So, I mean, last year, our incoming class was great coming in, and I really would have put us probably right here in the middle. I don't know our exact percentile numbers from that standpoint. I'll say this, just from the numbers that I have seen, football, men's volleyball, acrobatics and tumbling, some of the sports we've added have really enhanced the enrollment numbers. Now, obviously, it's not just, they're not coming just for the sports. But we've been able to get in and bring some students that maybe wouldn't have come if it wasn't for that. All right, I'm going to move on to this next one here. All right, so this is talking about athletes in general, not necessarily just football players. So the graph at the top is just football. The graph at the bottom is all student athletes here. So athletes are key to fill Division III schools, right? Student athletes, football players especially, are crucial for many Division III schools to meet their enrollment goals. Winning over the students that they want and populating their entire classes with engaged students, which is quickly getting more and more difficult and important every single year. So what you'll see up here at the top, right here, the blue, Division III football players as a percentage of full-time undergraduates. So again, this was from all 238 schools that reported in financial year 2023. And you'll see as far as, just about between 25 and 30%, and then down here below 5%, kind of a wide range there, but you can see the percentage of undergraduate students who are football players there. And so as you look over here at the bottom, football teams, their percentage of full-time undergraduates, so in the 25th percentile, about 4%, the median range about 6.2%, and in the 75th percentile, just under 10% there of the entire student body being football players. I think this next one's very interesting. So when you look at this dark blue piece down here, or purple, this is talking about Division III varsity athletes as full-time undergraduates, right? So again, all institutions reporting there. Very interesting numbers as you look at this. And so some schools have completely leveraged athletics and said, hey, this is going to drive our enrollment. You'll see some of these, this is up to almost 85% of all students at that particular institution are student athletes. And you'll see in the, you can just look at the numbers here. In the 25th percentile is 22%. Right at the median range, there's 31%. The 75th percentile is 40.8% there. So just very interesting numbers to look at how most Division III schools are smaller in enrollment and how they have leveraged athletics to continue to drive a piece of the enrollment. It's not the only thing driving it, but you can see there's some numbers here that show it's important that those things are there. So I thought this was just very, very interesting information to look at there. Yes?
Share this over your mic, because I don't have one, but Calvin sits right in that median.
Yes. Yep, so yeah, great point. So Calvin sits right here in this median range between 30 and 35% of our full-time undergraduate students are student athletes, which is great. I think that's a very healthy place to live. That's just my personal opinion. I think that's a very healthy place for an institution to live there. Any questions over that? All right, we're moving right along then. Okay. I think this is the last chart I have on here for right now. All right, Division III football player finances, all right? So, again, just more interesting information to look at here. So over here on the, okay, so, and I should start out by saying, there's institutions actually listed here on the bottom, right? So these examples come from Division III football playoff qualifiers from the last 2 seasons. So teams that made the playoffs. So the top end of Division III from a competitive standpoint, this is what it looks like from that standpoint. So $0 up to $85,000 is what's over here on this side. The institutions are listed down here. As you look at the key here, right, so in red, that's football cost per player, average net price per student, and then you got your in-state full price and then your out-of-state full price if that applies for these. So essentially the top number there is what it costs to go to school there, and this just shows what they're paying per student athlete there to actually run the football program and what those numbers look like. So interesting as you look across the board here, just what these different numbers are from that standpoint. So any questions about that? Yes?
Most of the schools seem to have relatively low cost per player. A couple of them have high cost per player. Do you have any idea why that is?
Yeah, so like this one here, it's interesting because Mary Hardin Baylor is in Texas and Hardin Simmons they're both in Texas and the cost is much higher there. What's interesting, and I don't know this for sure, is they carry very, very large roster. So I don't know if that's a piece of it, because they're playing a varsity and a junior varsity schedule and there's more travel involved there, whereas Hardin Simmons is not necessarily playing both of those schedules. So the bigger your roster is, can be a good thing because you're bringing in more, net revenue, but also you've got to spend a whole bunch on those guys. And so I would imagine that has to do with the travel piece of it there at Mary Hardin Baylor. They also have like 23 coaches on their staff there. They have a huge staff there. So really good question. Any other questions? Nothing. Okay, cool. Does that make sense? Just talking about the kind of the fun. I think it's very interesting to look at what does this look like from a big picture standpoint when you're talking about, because there's all these different numbers thrown around, from FBS to small college to what does it actually cost to operate? Are we making money? Are we losing money? What does that look like there from that standpoint? So, I think that Division III is in a very healthy place when it comes from that. I think that the Division III model is pretty pure because there's not there's not athletic scholarships. And so that takes a huge financial piece out of it for each different institution. But then you're also, you're not driving, the huge revenue coming in because of the ticket sales and, the TV contracts just aren't quite the same there from that standpoint. So where is Calvin football today? Right, this is really kind of the last piece I want to talk about, and then I'll open this up for questions at the end. I said this at the very beginning. I'm so incredibly thankful to stand up here as the first head football coach at Calvin. We started this football program here just 27, 28 months ago, so just over 2 years ago. And it's been really cool to see what's happened over that amount of time. So whenever I got hired, we had no football players, we had no football pads, we had really nothing that was Calvin football. And the Calvin community has just jumped on board and said, hey, we're going to really support this thing. And what has come from that is we now have, as of this morning, we have 25 kids committed to come play in next year's class. So right now we're at 114 for next year. We'll be up right at 120 will be our roster size for next year. And things are moving really, really quickly. But even more importantly than that, what we've been able to see is, one, we've been able to get into some high schools and bring some students to Calvin that maybe wouldn't have come here. But the most important piece are the outcomes for our young men. So what we've seen in our program, some first-generation college students that maybe wouldn't have gone to college and are now going to college, right? We have students that are able to work internships, and we have some kids that just graduated in last year's class that were here whenever I got here that already have jobs. So what we're seeing is, because I think a major fear when you add something as big as football to a university is, does it become an independent contractor? Is it its own piece, or does it all work together? So when you look academically at our guys, we're involved in nearly every major on campus. We have guys involved in nearly every student organization on campus. And so football's been good here up to this point, bringing it into Calvin. And then from, when you look at the numbers of what does it cost to run a football program, I think we fit right there in the middle of where everybody's at from that standpoint. So very, very pleased with where things are at right now. Big picture-wise, college football, with the transfer portal, with name, image, and likeness, I think there's a lot of things to unpack for the NCAA. They've got to make a lot of decisions on the direction they want to take college football, especially at the highest level, of are they going to put some rules and regulations in, name, image, and likeness. Can a kid get $10 million right out of high school to go play football somewhere? And what does all that look like? So there's a ton of questions that we don't have answers to. Generally speaking, the universities I've been a part of, the football programs I've been a part of, all go back to the same mission. We want to see young men leave our doors 4 years later the best version of themselves they've ever been. We want to see them be championship husbands, championship fathers, and the best citizens they can possibly be. So I feel like things are going well at Calvin from that standpoint. What I want to do now is just anything we've talked about over the last 3 class periods, any questions you guys have, I'd love to answer those. So whether it's about me personally, about Calvin football, Calvin football big stage. Any questions? She's going to bring you the mic. I'm going to get in trouble. I've answered 2 questions without the mic today.
Oh, question about, you see on the major universities where there's like Nike and Reebok and so on, sponsor uniforms, et cetera.
Yeah.
Anything like that for Calvin?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so every university is a little bit different. So when I was at the University of Oregon, obviously we were with Nike. And we were, at some schools, Nike's going to provide a whole bunch of things because it's basically free advertising for them. But for a lot of schools, you just have a purchasing agreement. And so you can sign an agreement with a particular brand saying, hey, everything we wear is going to be that brand, but we're still going to pay for it. So in our conference, most of the teams have a contract with a third-party vendor, and it chooses their brand for them. We actually don't have that here at Calvin, and so each team, generally speaking, uses Nike, but you can use whatever here at Calvin from a branding standpoint.
At a school like U of M, who just signed a high school student for like $10 million,
Yeah.
what exactly is that money made up of?
That's a really good question. So the easy answer would just be to say, I don't know. So what you have to do is student athletes for name, image, and likeness, money in particular, they have to perform something. They have to do something to get that money. So whatever's written in that particular agreement could be he has to sign so many footballs, could be he has to make appearances at different places. There are obligations that person has, but they can really be anything that the collective wants it to be. So there's nothing specific about you have to work this many hours, you're paid this much per hour. It's truly just an agreement between that young man and the collective saying, I'm going to do this to get this money. Yes.
Well, the Big Ten took the plunge and brought in the West Coast.
All right, hold on. I have a question first. Explain the plunge. I'm not disagreeing.
Expanded.
Yeah, for sure.
It really expanded.
Really expanded, yes.
So that might work for the big money institutions, but some of the other maybe smaller Big Ten schools have now got huge travel expenses. Flights.
Oh, yeah.
You talked about motels and meals and everything else. I'm just wondering, I guess I don't even know my question. It's just, had they thought this through about what this might mean, not for the big 2 or 3, but for all of them? And where is this going to lead other, the SEC, the ACC, going forward? Are we going to get down to 2 or 3 or 4 conferences, period?
So that you make a really good point there. So have they thought it through? First, I would just want to say, like, who is they? And no. That's my first response. One thing that I think a lot of people don't think about, and so I think those decisions were made for football, if I'm just being perfectly honest with you, because those teams are going to travel 1 time a week. They're probably going to travel every other week, and their games are played on Saturday. So I think what the NCAA truly has to take a look at, what's best for the student athlete. I think for football, I don't think it's as big of a deal. I think about sports like baseball, softball, soccer, whatever that looks like. If I'm a soccer player at USC and I've got a game, they might play 2, 3, 4 games a week. I've got a game at Rutgers, then I have a home game, then I have a game at Indiana. I'm never in class. And so to me, the bigger concern is the student athlete piece, is how is that affecting the student athlete? One, huge cost, which I think is ridiculous. But I think the effect on the student piece of it is a big deal that has to be looked at. And so I think the answer, this is just my personal opinion, is, well, and even if you look at the ACC, last year in the ACC you have Florida State, Miami, but also Cal and Stanford. So how does that make sense for them to do that, right? And so I don't think that's been completely thought through. I'm a huge proponent of regional conferences because they're I believe in the student athlete model. And you go to college to get an education and to graduate from there. And when you're never in class, it makes it really, really hard. Again, that's just my opinion, but I think that the travel piece for the non-football programs is the biggest deal because those students are missing so many classes. But then, like you said, the cost of, I mean, if I'm at whatever school on the West Coast and I'm flying all the way across the country a couple times a week, or do you just, fly from USC to Indiana, and then I stay in a hotel for a week, and then I go to Rutgers and I stay there, and then I think it makes it really hard. I disagree with the model, I guess is what I should have started with.
Continuing on that same thread, the teams that were left behind in the Northwest,
Yeah.
would they have taken a large economic revenue hit from loss in TV revenue?
Huge. Yeah. No, I mean, you can see on there the TV deals generate, and that's why teams left, was for the TV money. Because at the end of the day, what I think, and I think what other people think, is name, image, and likeness is probably going to circle back to TV revenue. And at some point, when the NCAA or whoever it is puts a cap on it, it will be based off of TV revenue. So the more TV revenue I'm getting, the more money my student athletes are going to get. So that's the whole reason why they did that, was they did it for the TV money. But the teams that were left out on the West Coast, huge financial hits.
Just a question. You as coaches on campus, do you ever interact with each other and support each other, encourage each other?
For sure. So you're talking about like myself and then coaches.
The volleyball coach, the
Absolutely.
basketball
Yeah,
coach?
so if you were to come over in our facility, we have a big lunch table, right? And every day at noon, if you come out there, a lot of the coaches are eating together. And then we encourage our athletes to go to other games. So just as an example, this past Saturday, our men's basketball team had a big game against Trine. So the football team, we had a little pizza party before the game. So if you give free pizza, the kids are going to come, right? And so we bought pizza for our guys, then they all went to the game together. So I think, now I'll say this, it's not like that everywhere. I've been at 7 different universities, and I've said this several times before, this is the healthiest athletic department that I've ever been a part of. But I think it starts with the leaders in our athletic department. I think Dr. Jim Timmer does a phenomenal job of creating a culture where people want to do that. But our athletes also know that, hey, if they go support each other, well, maybe that team will come support me, whenever it's my season. And so I think here we do an incredible job of that. It doesn't happen like that everywhere, but at most places they do. Yep.
You said in the MIAA there were a couple of teams that had like a couple of hundred kids on a roster. Who are those schools?
Yep. So from a football, I'll just speak to football because that's what I know best. So Alma carries 194 last year. Trine was just over 200 last year. Adrian, I believe, is the one in the 180s. And those are the 3 biggest rosters on our league.
About 20 years ago, the college looked at football, and you probably know a little bit of the history by now. And at that point, the decision was not to have football.
Right.
And I remember being part of the discussions, and one of the big concerns was traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
So my question is, with regard to that, what are your thoughts on that? And what, as a coach, are you doing to try to mitigate that impact?
Yeah.
I think it's still a serious problem, and what do we do about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And so we take a really close look at injury history, injury prevention, and I don't know if this will help ease your mind or not. When you look at percentage of concussions at Calvin, I think football is 4th of all the sports from that standpoint. So there are sports that are even more dangerous than football, but that's something I take very seriously. I have 3 young sons of my own. They've grown up around football practice, and now they're at the age where they're like, hey, Dad, I want to play tackle football. I'm like, yeah, I don't know, right? So I think it is something that you have to take very seriously. The number one way to prevent that is through teaching your athletes how to properly tackle. So I think youth sports have swung in not a great direction. And I think the teaching piece of teaching young men how to tackle has gone by the wayside. And so you have to teach them that. Then the second thing, so I did a study a few years ago at a school I was at, just looking at concussions, and every kid that got a concussion, we looked at their helmet. The number one factor we found, they didn't have enough air in their helmet. So whenever I first started playing football, who in here played football? Anybody? Okay, so I don't know if you remember or not. Whenever you would put your helmet on, it would probably leave a big red mark on your forehead, and they called it helmet headache because it was very uncomfortable, because your helmet was very tight. It was completely full of air. Well, what kids have got to with helmets is like they don't really want their helmet to be uncomfortable anymore, so they take a little bit of air out of it, and that can lead to concussions. Your helmet's supposed to be very, very tight. So here at Calvin, the first piece of equipment that we purchased was helmets. And I sat down with our helmet rep, and I said, we want to be cost effective. We want to buy the very best helmet that we can possibly buy. So we stay on the front line of what technology can we get. Actually, just on campus today, I had a booster give us some funds to purchase what's called Guardian caps. And so that's another layer of support that's going to go on our players' helmets. It's cutting-edge technology to reduce concussions. So we're always going to look into teaching. How are we teaching our guys to tackle? Do we have the best helmets, and do we have the best technology with our helmets to work to prevent concussions? Because you're right, in any sort of contact sport, whether it's football, hockey, soccer, whatever it is, there is that risk for sure, and it can't be ignored.
So
question.
with your students, your football players, what would you say was the biggest stumbling block for recruitment as an infant team as Calvin?
Yeah, so the MIAA, the conference that we're in, if you were to look at our conference 10 years ago, it would have been in the bottom 25% of NCAA Division III. If you look at our conference now, I think we're the number 10 or 11 conference in NCAA Division III. The competition in our league has drastically grown in a great way for our conference. Our conference there's some really good football teams in our league. So the number one thing that we battled right away was just like, why should I go play there and not somewhere else in your league? Because they're winning, you've never played before. You guys are going to be really, really young. So the biggest hurdle was just overcoming every person that came to this program. So whenever I came here, I took a leap of faith to come start football. Every young man that's come into our program has taken a leap of faith because they've all had options to go play other places. So the hardest piece up to this point has just been painting a picture and a vision for what success on the field can and will look like, in a very short period. What other questions?
I attended your women's event
Yeah,
to kick football off.
yeah,
It was amazing.
yeah.
Your wife did a great job. Your student athletes spoke so well. But I walked away with a prayer card.
Yeah,
Would you mind if I read that to this group?
I would love for you to do that.
Okay. This is what your Calvin football is about. It might be helmets, it's shoulder pads, and academics, but this is at the top of the list. They're men of faith. And I'm going to read you the prayer that they gave to us. I keep this in my prayer journal. It's something I like to read every now and then. Dear Lord, you made us in your image, and we are grateful. As we launch the season of Calvin football, we pray that our players, coaches, and staff all reflect your image. Help them to be Christ-like, kind, and full of your Holy Spirit. May their identity be in you and not in their academics, athletics, or any other idol. Keep them safe, body, mind, and soul. Give them joy in their practice and in their play. Deepen their relationships with each other and with you. Most of all, may each person involved in this program bear witness to the good news of abundant life that is ours in Christ Jesus. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Very well done.
Thank you. That's what I truly believe when people ask me, why do you coach football? Why do you do this? There's so many different things involved with it. This is the vehicle that God has given me to go work my very hardest to impact the lives of young men that he brings to this program. So there's a whole bunch that goes in. There's a whole bunch of moving parts that go with college football. At the end of the day, it's a really cool vehicle that we get to use to go spread the good news, right? To give students a really tremendous 4-year college student-athlete experience. So I think Calvin does that really well. Like I've said before, I'm so thankful to be able to stand up here as the head football coach. And I'm thankful you guys came to this class. This was fun. Hopefully you guys had some fun. Hopefully you got something out of this class. Feel free to reach out via email if you guys have other questions. I'd love to see you guys at games. We're very, very excited about where this thing is going. So, yes, another question.
What does your recruitment season look like? What, every weekend you go, or during the week you go to a different school?
Yeah. Yep.
And then what does that look like?
Yep, that's a great question. And I should really just talk about, people ask me all the time, so what do you do all the time? Right? Let me just explain that, what we do all the time. So recruitment is a huge piece of that. So let me just take you through quickly kind of a 1,000-foot view of a year, right? And so I'll just start where we're at right now. So we're at the very end of February. So we just put, or are putting, the final touches on our 2025 recruiting class. So young men that are graduating this May and making college decisions, we've been working with them for the last year. It takes about a year in our process to get someone to say, yes, I'm going to come to school there, come play football there. So March 1st is when we start on the next year's recruiting class. So next week we start on the 2026 recruiting class. We will start with a bank of about 3,500 names that we're going to start to do research on. And these are young men from all over Michigan, from this region, from Southern California, Texas, Florida, really all over the place, right? So we're going to start to weed through that list of names. And then what it looks like going forward is in May, they will have the start of a process called prospect camps. So really from March 1st to May 1st, we will be we'll be talking with high school coaches. We'll be talking with kids all over the country. And then in May, we'll start to go see these kids in person. So the first 2 weeks of May, we'll be in their high schools, talking to their coaches, meeting these young men. The second week of May through the end of June, kids will go perform at what we call prospect camps. So we will host 2 prospect camps that'll have roughly, in total, about 250 young men come and show us what they can do on the field. And then we will go to between 8 and 10 other universities' prospect camps and see other kids. So by the time we get to July 1, we will have evaluated close to 1,000 kids in person. So then we really kind of start to whittle our list down to about 1,000 at that point. From July to mid-August, we really start to hone in on, hey, here's the top 500 young men that we're going to go recruit in this class. And then from there, we start to invite those young men onto our campus. So they'll come watch us play a game. Throughout our season, they'll come watch games. We will go watch their games on Friday nights. And then as soon as our season ends, we get back on the road. We go see kind of our final 100 kids in person. And then we invite them and their families to campus for an on-campus visit. So since December 4th, up until yesterday, we've had, I think, 72 families on campus. And when they come on campus, it's a very in-depth tour that we do with them. So we show them all of our campus. They eat in the cafeteria. They meet with professors. They sit down. I meet with every family one-on-one. They meet with our coaching staff one-on-one. And each kid will do that at 5 or 6 different schools. And then from really December 1 until March 1, they make their final decisions. So it's a year-round process from that standpoint. So we try to be very thorough, very diligent with who we bring in. We talk to their high school coaches. We talk to their counselors. We talk to teachers. We talk to their teammates. What's great about having our current team is a lot of guys that we recruit come from high schools where we already have kids on our roster, so we can ask them, hey, tell me about this young man, tell me about this young man, so we can find out. When we were first starting, it was hard because we didn't have a reference point to start with, but that's really what the year-round calendar looks like from that standpoint. Very busy.
is there such a thing as a walk-on in Division III?
So yes and no. So the answer to yes would be everybody. So what makes a kid a walk-on at Division I is they don't get a football scholarship. And so since we don't give football scholarships, they're technically all walk-ons. But where I think people get that confused is it's not an open roster. Like I'll get an email from a kid and say, hey, when are your all's tryouts? We don't have tryouts because we go recruit. It's very competitive, so we do. So when we offer a kid, when we say, hey, you're offered to play at Calvin, that means we're offering you one of our 120 roster spots. So we do offer kids to come onto our team, but they're technically walk-ons because they're not getting football money.
Since you started as head football coach at Calvin, what is your biggest surprise here?
Wow, that's a great question. So last summer, whenever our season tickets went on sale and they sold out within like 10 days, I knew people were excited, but the excitement around it has been very cool to see. Very cool. Like I said, I've been at several different places, and the excitement around supporting student athletes at Calvin has been very cool here. Yes.
So I look around the room and I think it's mostly people my age, which I put in the grandpa and grandma category. And I just want to share a story with you because it was very meaningful for me. A good friend of mine had a daughter transfer to Calvin here this past fall, and this is where he went. He was my roommate, and this is where he wanted his kids to go, he wanted his grandkids to go, so he was, happy that she was coming, but just kind of concerned how would it go. And he just relayed when I saw him this past fall that her first day was a hot summer fall day. She's moving in. And the thing that really struck him was when she moved in, there were a bunch of guys from the football team who were volunteering to pick up those heavy, whatever the heavy things were that had to be moved into a dorm room. And that just made such an impression on him that that your gentlemen were doing that kind of service. So I think, you can look at it from a whole bunch of different ways, but I think that when service is shown in that kind of way, and by the way, she's had a great start and really loves it here, so that's great. But I think the key thing was just to share with this group that, when you see service in action like that, it's not on the football field, but it makes a very meaningful impact on students' lives and on grandparents' lives for that matter. So,
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. It's really important to me when we talk about champions in the community and what that means, that we put our young men in situations to be successful, right? And so what we did that morning, instead of having practice, we put on our uniforms and we said, we're going to stand by the curb, and when people pull up, we're going to ask if we can help them carry their things into the dorm, because that's what you should do, right? And no, I think that I'm very thankful that our guys do that. I'm glad that they were doing a good job with that. But it's important to me that piece is done really well. Anything else? Yes. Oh, she has to bring you the mic.
How did Calvin find you? You're on the other coast.
It's funny how this world works. It really is. Yeah, so they were doing a search for the head coach, and those involved with doing the search were asking around just different, I think, people or programs maybe that they respected within the industry. Who would you recommend? And for some wild reason, 2 or 3 different people recommended me and gave them my name, and so that's really how it all started. It's very, very interesting how, I still have the first message I ever received from someone at Calvin that just said like, hey, we're doing a search for a head football coach, would you be interested? I'd never heard of Calvin before. So the good Lord, honestly, that's my only answer to that.
Would you all join me in thanking Coach Trent Figg, please? So you all have recordings too from these 3 weeks that we've had, and feel free to share them. We'll keep them open longer than the 60 days. So come August, as we start thinking football, just send this to people you know so that they become more acquainted who our coach is for our football team. Thank you.
Thank you all.